You're listening to Procurement 6, the weekly podcast from the team at Art of Procurement that summarizes this week in procurement in just 6 short segments.
Hi there, I'm Philip Heidson, and today is Friday, April 5th, 2024.
6.
This week's Procurement 6 is brought to you by the Retail and Supply Chain Logistics Expo in Las Vegas this May. Art of Supply is a media partner for the event, and they recently showcased some of Kelly's writing to their community, an update on the mess still facing Boeing. To read the article and to learn more about the event, click the link in today's show notes. And if you book a ticket, remember to use the code ARTOFP100, that's ARTOFP100, during the registration process.
5.
In this week's Art of Procurement podcast, I spoke with Mark Hollyoak, Managing Director of Procurement Recruitment at Hollyoak Search. Now, we talked all things about the labour market. Mark happily declared that the procurement job market is officially back, hiring is getting stronger, salaries are stabilising, and talent is abundant. It seems to be good times indeed for hiring in procurement, but with calmer waters ahead, he does see some employers becoming complacent and falling back into old bad habits. In this clip from the episode, Mark shares what he sees as the biggest mistake procurement employers are making now in recruitment. Let's listen in.
We're facing numerous challenges, whether you're actively looking for a role because you're out of a job or because you're very nervous about your current job, or whether you're just a passive job seeker that's sort of open-minded to being approached once in a while. In speaking with these folks, the biggest frustration actually isn't coming second or third in a bunch of interview processes. People can handle that, right? I think they are understanding of the fact that they may not be the best fit for every single job out there, much as they would like to think they are. They admit that companies have a target skill set in mind, and that with a lot of people looking, sure, that may be them and it may not. What is causing the most frustration is a complete lack of response from most companies to any and all applications. So these people aren't even getting an at-bat, right? They are incredibly well qualified and they're hearing nothing, and it's happening over and over again because the sheer volume of applicants and the resource constraints within hiring teams is resulting in delayed or non-existent communication. And it's leaving candidates in limbo and disheartened and frankly put off by the lack of feedback. And it's being compounded by the fact that a lot of companies just simply haven't adjusted their recruitment practices again to meet the needs of the market now that it's turned again, right? They've become really comfortable with the idea that they're back in control of the interview process, that they have all this unlimited choice over who they hire. And if they were recruiting in the middle of 2023, they probably did, but things have changed. And so a lot of poor processes and poor behaviors are starting to creep back in, and ultimately it's driving frustration amongst job seekers because they're just not hearing anything.
While ghosting candidates might not be intentional on the part of employers, the sheer volume of applications many hiring teams get makes it hard to manage. It can have negative downstream impacts beyond the individual candidate experience. To listen to the full episode and hear Mark's recommendations on how employers can better manage a growing talent pool of applicants without ghosting, go to artofprocurement.com/podcast or search for Art of Procurement and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts, or click in today's show notes link.
4.
This week's Art of Supply is Kelly's monthly interview, and she welcomed back Jeffrey Goldstein, the founder and president of Onward Global. Based in Shanghai, Jeff and his team serve as the boots on the ground for companies around the world that are sourcing in China, helping them overcome cultural and strategic obstacles to value. Now, it's impossible to discuss global supply chains without being hyper-aware of the role of China, whether it's access to critical raw materials, specialization in certain production processes, or labor advantages. Relocating supply chains to other parts of the world is harder than it sounds. Jeffrey shared that China's supply chain has gone through significant transformative changes in the last 5 years. Jeff said that for executives or engineers, designers or buyers who have not been in China since before COVID, they're going to see a completely different China. These changes have created a sense of uncertainty that foreign buyers have to understand and navigate. According to Jeffrey, there are two important macro shifts happening in China that are important to be aware of: economic instability and emerging labour trends. Now listen into this week's Art of Supply to hear the rest of Jeff's first-hand perspective on doing business with Chinese suppliers today.
This is Procurement 6 from Art of Procurement. To get notified every time an episode is published, go to artofprocurement.com/subscribe. 3.
In this week's episode of the Sourcing Hero podcast, we hear from J. Grant Kaplan. Grant is the president of Procurigence, a managed travel consulting and conference resources firm, and is also part of our Spend Pros team. Now, travel has changed a lot since the pandemic, although not in the way that most of us might assume. There's certainly been adjustments to logistics and expectations, but most of all, companies are actually doing a better job of recognizing the wellness considerations intertwined with business travel and finding purposeful ways to accommodate their travelers without onerous increases to the budget. Listen to the podcast this week to hear a brief state of the state of business travel, how the role of internal travel manager has changed, and why travel policy is just as important as planning and logistics.
2.
At an AOP Live webinar this week with our friends at Supplier.io, I was asked about how to apply the concept of differentiated decision-making to sustainability. So the concept of differentiated decision-making requires us to think about how you, as procurement, as a procurement professional, are helping your businesses make different decisions that it wouldn't make on its own. So to me, that's at the heart of the purpose of procurement. So specific to sustainability, I considered 5 different areas where I think we could make a difference. One is in sourcing, so incorporating ESG factors into supplier selection. What are some of the environmental practices or labor conditions, for example, that exist at our suppliers? Also on sourcing is considering local sourcing. That both investing in local communities, it can be combined with supply diversity programs, but also considers reducing your carbon footprint. Next was supply development. So how can you work with suppliers to develop new products and processes that may be more environmentally friendly than the ones that you buy today? Not necessarily for use today, but for use when you're looking at re-engineering a process, re-engineering a product. The third is risk management. I think that sustainability is a big part of risk management for procurement. One of the specific areas that I shared in the webinar was really to understand the supplier's exposure to climate change, to water scarcity, to local labor disputes. All those things should be taking your consideration as part of your category strategies and your supplier and sourcing strategies. Now, the next one was if you're a bigger company in your industry, as procurement, you have the ability to advocate for new sustainability policies within your industries, or even using your purchasing power to leverage or to advocate for practices and standards, ESG practices and standards. If you're a bigger company, you have the ability to kind of set expectations with your supply base, and that can actually really run through the entire industry. If you as a large player in the industry start asking for something, then it makes it easier for others to start asking the same. And the last area that I shared in response to this specific question was employee engagement. And I actually think training, we talked about this in the webinar, training is a big part of really helping the organization understand why ESG is important and ESG issues and ESG practices related to procurement. So procurement has this opportunity to actually help educate your own colleagues, whether it's through training, communications, or whatever it may be, but being proactive in sharing why this matters. So if you are interested, you can watch the entire webinar again. Just click the link in today's show notes.
1.
Join us on Tuesday, April 10th for a live discussion with Yannick Caharal, the Chief Procurement Officer of Christian Dior Couture, and Pierre Lepre, the Chief Product Officer at Spend HQ. They're going to talk about how procurement can increase and better communicate their total value, even in turbulent economic times. To sign up for this webinar, you can just go to artofprocurement.com/calendar, or you'll find the link directly to it in the show notes for today's episode.
Thanks for listening. We'll be back next Friday at 6 a.m. U.S. Eastern Time. If you've enjoyed this pod, help us grow and tell your peers to search for Procurement 6 wherever they get their podcasts.